Hey folks, so I don't know about you, but the first of the year isn't going quite the way I had expected it to. If you guys are like me, you're of course locked down for the time being, which is always fun. I seem to have about a dozen half-finished projects in the shop, including a queen-size bed that I'm working on, a new wasteboard that I'm trying to get installed onto the Shapeoko, and several other tiny things here and there. But I wanted to get a video out just to prove that I'm still alive and to try and get things going again for the new year. So I kind of needed something a little bit more normal, some comfort food, if you will. So I'm going to go back to one of my favorite topics, which is, of course, boxes. So here's an example of a box I made a long time ago. This is one with a sliding lid, and it's made in the traditional way that most boxes are. Sides, ends, top, bottom, all being separate pieces. And I mean, essentially all these are is a set of rectangles. So if I have, say, a box bottom, and then I do some more rectangles like this, that will stand up, right? Eventually, you've got a box. Right? And you cut these things out of all separate pieces and you put it all together, and that's what makes your box. Now, we're all used to doing this kind of thing in normal woodworking, and in CNC it's pretty easy to just, mark out your rectangles on your wood and have it cut these individual pieces for you. And that's a perfectly fine box, and for a lot of larger boxes it's even probably the best way to go. But what I wanted to show you today is a little bit different. Something like this is made out of a single piece of wood. Right? There are no joints in this. It's a much more organic looking box. But it can be a little bit difficult to figure out in your brain how to go from something with lots of pieces to something like this. Now, the thing to notice when you're dealing with CNC is instead of designing, say, from the side, I've got a bunch of pieces, I know what they look like from the side, you're designing from the top down. So if we look at this, it's really just two rectangles, one on the inside and one on the outside. And that's how we could design something like this. Typically with a box like this, you're going to need some thick stock, right? So you're going to need something like, say, a large piece of maple. This is about almost 2 inches thick. And not everybody's going to have access to this kind of stuff. Most people will have access to, the lumber from the home center. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a few pieces of just plain old red oak, and we're going to set one aside for our lid, and we're going to glue two of these together, and they'll be our body, and that'll be thick enough for us to get for our body. So I'm going to go ahead and glue these two together and see if we can get things started. First off, we need to do a safety check. Has everybody got their masks on? Okay, good. Let's go ahead and get this started, see if we can't get this show on the road. We're all sterile, we're all ready. Let's light this candle. Okay, so here's our two pieces of red oak. You want to make sure that these are flat where they're coming together, so you shouldn't see any gaps around here, right? I tend to use Tight Bond for most things. Gives me a good amount of open time and holds very well. So that's definitely what I would recommend. now once you've got them like this, what I tend to do is put them down and wiggle them around a little bit like that. That gets that glue good and smeared everywhere. Put them on their side like this, and we'll go ahead and clamp them up. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is get a decent measurement on our board. Looks like we've got 4 inches by about 10. And while I'm comfortable measuring width and length with the tape measure, if I'm going to measure thickness, I want a set of these dial calipers. It pays to be accurate with this, because despite the fact that they say it's, 3/4 boards, they really never are. They're something different. In this case, the two of them together is 1.4 instead of 1.5, which would what 2 3/4 would be. Okay, so there's a couple other things you want to make sure of when you're working with thicker wood like this. The first is the length of your bit, the cutting length in particular. You notice this 1/4 inch bit doesn't have cutting all the way up, which means that when it's coming across like this and it's going down deep, this piece may bang against the edges and it wants to like move your piece out, and you'll get a lot of problems essentially with that. So what I've got chucked up here is a bit with a good 1.5 inches of cutting room, and you can see from here that goes down below the board, and all of that is cutting length, which is good. One other thing to make sure of is you'll notice when you initialize your machine, I'm going to do that right now. It goes to this back corner, comes in a little bit, and the same thing for its up and down piece. It goes to the edge of the limit switch and stops and then drops down a little bit. Now this is the maximum height that bit's going to be when it moves in and out of the cuts. It's important to make sure that your board fits underneath that. If not, you may need to choke up a little bit on this bit. But still, the two things to make sure of is that A, the bit can go deep enough to actually get to the bottom of your board, and B, that your board actually fits under this after the initialization or the homing routine. Now, I can bump this up a little further, but when it comes out of the cut, it's still going to want to come out at this height, which is what the machine has been told is 0 for homing. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is set the size of our stock like always. And if you'll recall, our board was 10 inches wide and 4 inches tall and 1.4 inches thick. Okay, and we're going to zero our tool path from that bottom edge. That's fine. Hardwood, Shape Oak 03, retract height's fine. Okay, so now we've got our view. Let's go ahead and reset. Cool. So that gives us what our stock looks like. And all we're going to do here is make 2 rectangles. It's really that easy. Don't really care what size they are initially because I'm going to change it. So I want to make this first one 5.5, and I'm going to make this one 3.5. Okay, that's a nice enough size for a box, and I'm going to go ahead and fillet the corners, and let's go ahead and do that 0.75. That radius should give our 1/4 inch bit plenty of room to get in to these corners and these edges as we need to. So then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the offset path, and I'm going to bring this inside 0.2 inches. Now, this is where things get kind of crummy, and I don't like some of the stuff that carbide occasionally does. You notice it's squared this now, so we don't have the fillet, which is kind of a pain. But what I'm going to do is this. Take note of the measurements here, right? So I know that that's what I need, 5.1, 3.1. I can delete this and create another rectangle, 5.1, 3.1. I can do my fillet the way I want to. 5. And then I can just line these back up. So that's the basics of our box right there. It's just 2 rectangles. And all we're going to do on our tool path is come in and select this first one. We're going to do a pocket contour. I'm going to change this to my 1/4 inch bit. And yeah, they have made this way overcomplicated right now, which drives me a little nuts. Hardwood, end mills, 1/4 inch. This is actually the one that's got the deeper shank to it. Tell it OK. OK. Cool. So now I've got that. I'm going to do this one as a pocket cut, so it's going to go all the way around in. And the stock bottom is 1/4. I want to leave myself a little bit of room, so I'm going to leave myself about 1/4 inch. So instead of 1/4, I'm going to do 1/15. That should leave me, if my math serves me correctly, 1/4 inch on the bottom. So that's my pocket. Cool. That is a long time. 1 hour and 7 minutes. That seems a little bit steep. Let's check that. So, depth per pass. That depth per pass is a little sad. We're going to go with something a little bit different. I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to take that to 0.1. That should cut our time in about half. Yeah, so about 32 minutes. I can live with that. And then we'll go ahead and do the same thing on our outer cut. This one's still got our 1/4. We're going to go and change our depth per pass again. 0.1's fine. And we're going to choose stock bottom on that. Now, on this particular one, I'm not going to do any tabs, and I'll show you why when we set up our cut. But we don't need them for this particular methodology. If you're using clamps, you're going to need them, but we're going to do something a little different this time. Okay, so I've got my cutout and I've got my pocket. All right, let's go ahead and save our G code. All right, and now we should be ready to cut. So as I said, this time we're going to try something a little different. This is a holding method all the cool kids are using that involves blue painter's tape and CA glue. Wasn't sold on it initially, but it does seem to have a lot of holding power and the cleanup is a lot easier. So what you do is we're going to go ahead and take some of our blue tape and we're going to cover our board. I'm just getting to the edges here. Right? you don't really want to overlap much on this because it'll create kind of a lump in the tape. So you just kind of want to line it up on your edges here. Don't get too precious about it. Then you want to do the same thing on your board, right? So we use 2 strips there. We're going to use 2 strips here. And this is where the lines on my board come in really handy to me. Make sure that I can get things parallel to where the bit runs. Okay. All right, cool. So now I'm going to take some of this lovely CA glue. All right. Cool. That should be fine. I'm going to take my board. I'm going to put it down. I'm going to give it a little bit of a rub around here to just make sure I get good coverage on that glue. Get it lined up. And then put 2 of these specialty hold down devices on top. And I'm going to let that sit for about 5 minutes, and we'll go ahead and come back and we'll make our cut. Okay, I've probably pointed this out before, but it's worth pointing out again, especially if you're new to CNC. When you initially do zeroing the machine, it goes into this back corner up here. That gives it one position that it knows where the end of this bit is. Now the next thing we need to tell it is where this corner is on our material. That'll give it 2 points to reference, and it'll essentially be able to map in its head the area of this stock. So we're going to go ahead and take this and jog it over until we get to this corner, and then we're going to push it down until it just touches the wood. And now that I've got it close, I'm going to go ahead and drop the speed a little bit so that we're just going a couple of jumps at a time. All right. Okay, and then I'm going to use a piece of paper here, and I'm going to bring this down. Okay, now it's pinched the paper. I'm going to drop the speed, the distance a little further, bring it back up until it... Okay, now I can slide that paper around, and I want to bring it down till it just stops. And I've got that paper now. So now I know that is the top of my machine, and I'm going to zero all of my pieces in carbide motion. Now I'll go ahead and bring this back up because I need to put my dust collection on, and then we'll be ready to go. So here you notice we've got our box bottom, and it stayed completely still even when the box itself has been separated from the basic wood piece. The tape does a really nice job, the tape and the super glue do a really nice job of holding this down. Now I usually take like a chisel and slide it under there and just kind of pry this up. Sometimes you can just pull it off, but most of the time you'll need something with a little more oomph to go ahead and pry it up. So we've got our box, and I need to pop that up just a hair. Cool. And now we just peel the tape off the bottom. Alright. And it comes off, you know, pretty easy for the most part. You'll find if you overdo your glue, sometimes you'll get glue on the bottom of the box, and that can be a bit of a pain. So All right, we've got a nice little bottom here, and you just see our line going around from where our piece was. We'll get rid of that with some final sanding. The next thing we need to do is cut our lid. Now, if you recall, I had one extra piece of 3/4 that I was going to use for the lid. Now, the problem you run into with this is going to make for a bit of a bulky looking box to me. So I don't know that I want it to be that thick. I think I'd rather have it about a 1/2 inch rather than the 3/4. So what we're going to do with this, and I'll show you how in the program, is we're going to cut out essentially the same pattern. And if you look at one of my earlier lids, right, it's the same thing. It's the two rectangles, right? But this time the rectangle is designed to fit down inside as opposed to up. So we want this piece higher than this. We also want to go ahead and make this board thinner. So the way we're going to do that is to get something about this thin, is we'll go ahead and run a pocket pass over the entire area of where we want our lid to be, right? That will reduce the thickness of this board, and then we'll cut our other piece out from that thinner piece. And I'll show you how to do that in Carbide Create. Okay, so for our basic file here, I'm going to use the exact same file we had before, right? This is the same thing that we used, the same two rectangles we used to cut out our box bottom. I'm going to make a couple of small adjustments here though. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set our stock thickness to 0.8, and I measured that with the calipers. Okay, so now we know how thick our stock is. The other thing I'm going to do is, this is our inside lip, right? This is the piece that's going to stand up a little bit proud and fit down in the bottom of the box. To give us a decent fit, what I typically do with something like this is I'll take 1/100 of an inch off of both my measurements. So this will end up being 09, and this will end up being 09. Right, and then I'm going to select that and select this, and we're going to center them again just to make sure. All right, so that's got those two. So that just gives us a little bit of a play in that box, so it'll slide down nicely inside of there. So what we need to do is we need to make this piece of wood a little thinner. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a little square tool, and I'm going to cover the basics of the box, right? Okay, so that covers pretty much the entirety of my box lid. Close enough. And what I want to do there is I want to do a pocket pass around this whole thing. And that will thin my board out enough to where I can get a nicer looking lid. So if we're at 0.8 for the thickness of our board, I want to drop the thickness of this down by 0.3, and that'll give me a 1/2 inch board. So back in our toolpath section, I'm going to create a new group. Done weird things this again. Okay, cool. So group 2, I'm going to do a contour, I'm going to do a pocket. I'm going to change this yet again. Hardwood, 1/4 inch. Fine, okay. And we're going to change this 0.1 again. All right, so now I want to drop this down to 0.3. And I'm going to pocket, and that's going to shave 1/3 of an inch off of the entire area around this board. Then I need to make my other cuts. This we're just going to call thickness. Okay, and after that I want to come in and grab my inner piece. It's a little hard to see with this. I'm going to grab my inner piece here, and instead of cutting inside like we did for our box bottom, we're going to cut to the outside. All right, so I've got that. I want to contour, still keeping my 1/4 inch, and I'm going to contour around 0.2. Okay, that will give me the distance that I need. However, here's the thing. We just shaved off essentially 0.3, right? So what we really need to do is start this at 0.3 and make our max depth 0.5. So that's going to start now where we left off after we did this big pocket. And then it's going to drop down another 2. This gets a little confusing in places, but this is the way things work. Okay, so this is our lip. And then we're going to do the same thing for our cutout, right? I want to select this. I'm going to go to the outside this time. And I'm going to take this all the way down to the stock bottom. But I also still want to start this out at 0.3 because we don't want it just kind of waving around in the air for several passes. So we're going to do that, and we're going to call this cutout. Okay, so that cuts out, makes things thinner. Then our lip gets cut around the outside. Make sure, is that around the outside, or that looks like the inside? It is still set to inside. That would be bad. We want that set to the outside this time. Yes, always good to mouse over and check these things and see if it looks like it's supposed to. I also sometimes advise going into the simulation, turn these 2 off, show the simulation. Yeah, so that looks like what we want. It's going to pocket over the entire thing. Then we're going to get a taller lip and our bottom the way we want it. Now, like it shows here, we're going to end up with some little nibs here, and you can knock those off pretty easily. But that gives you an idea of what we're looking at, right? This piece here will fit down inside the box, and this will form the part of our lid that we want. So always good to play with the simulator and make sure that things look like they're supposed to. Hide the simulation. We've got this guy disabled, so we don't want to save him again. And we're just going to save this guy as our next G-code. And this is going to be our top. Okay, and let's give that a whirl. This is our top, and you can get an idea of what we did there with the drawing. We took the that first pocket, took everything down from the top of this to the top of here. Then we ran our bit around the outside of our lip, all the way around, and then we ran our bit around the outside of the box all the way to the bottom. And that gives us our top. So let's pull this out and put the 2 of them together and see what we got. Okay, so we got our box bottom here. Here's our nice little top. And those fit together like a glove. Very nice, very nice. So we can go ahead and add some decoration to this and do a little bit of cleanup, and we should have a very nice box here.